monsters. Hey guys! I just finished Resident Evil 3 Remake last night, and I wanted to make sure to do my review as fast as possible because it's fresh in my brain and I'm excited to get into it. I do want to state that this review will have some spoilers because I kind of want to talk about the differences between Resident Evil 3 1999 version and the remake version, so in that I'm going to have to discuss things that happen in Resident Evil 3. Alright, anyways. I thoroughly enjoyed the last two iterations of Resident Evil games, that being Resident Evil 7 and that being Resident Evil 2 Remake. So once I heard that they were going to do Nemesis, I was stoked. It didn't disappoint, but it wasn't perfect either. I completed the game in only 6.5 hours. Woo! It took me 8 hours to get through the Claire scenario in Resident Evil 2 Remake. That paired with, I think it probably took me another 8 hours to complete the Leon scenario. So it took me, anywhere between 14 to 16 hours to complete Resident Evil 2 Remake fully. So I was a little bit bummed that wasn't as long. Let's just dive right into the differences between the two games that I noticed. Maybe I'm not noticing everything. I haven't read anyone else's review. This is just me. The original had a ton of backtracking and the remake kind of cut that out. They switched things up for the better in my opinion by having Carlos enter RPD instead of Jill. Because of this Carlos change, we also see a different ending for our boy Brad at the hands of none other than Marvin, who's still alive in this. Marvin! I do wish we'd seen an exchange between him and Carlos, but we don't. We just see him for a brief minute and then he disappears. But Brad is originally killed by Nemesis because he kind of sacrifices himself for Jill. Speaking of Nemesis isn't after Tyrell or Carlos, so it does feel different knowing like he shouldn't pop up anywhere in this section. Also, it was super fun to see how Carlos's actions changed the police station for what we ended up seeing in RE2 Remake. Like, now we know who blew up the bathroom wall, and now we know like why some of these people were dead on the floor and things like that. So I thought that was a really nice touch. Gives you like a little nostalgic feel. I would say the biggest departure from the original is the fact that the whole clock tower level area is gone. Instead of being an intricate part of the story, it's merely a backdrop for a boss battle. At the beginning, that's like an unneeded puzzle. Like, I didn't even complete it. Once I saw the clock tower, I was like, oh, this is it, what's happening? And it just didn't happen. And it was kind of like, oh, they're just cutting that out. That's like a big part of the story. I'm not gonna say it was detrimental to the story at all because, they made up for it with the hospital scenes and everything. That kind of made more sense. Considering the game was shorter, I don't know, maybe they should have kept it in? I don't know, we'll get to more on that later. Another thing that was missing was the park area was gone too. Like, there was that whole Gravedigger boss fight in the original, and now that was gone. That was completely gone. I was a little bit confused at first because I thought maybe that spider section where we're getting all the generators back up. At first I thought we were going into the park, but it just ended up being like a power station. It wasn't the park at all. So I was a little confused, so I didn't really notice it too much until after I finished the game, and I was like, wait, we never went to the park either. Like, there was never that boss battle. And then another change is the lack of decision making and how to deal with Nemesis. In the original, they gave you the live option of fighting the beast or running from the beast. So it was always like, stand your ground, shoot Nemesis, or jump out the window. Like, you kind of had a decision of how you wanted to handle it. It would have been nice to have this option, I guess, to kind of change things up and give it a little bit more of a replay value, but it wasn't something that I really was upset about. And then the last difference, which I'm only going to touch on for a second, just in case somebody's watching this and they haven't played and they don't want everything ruined for them, there is no Barry in this version. There is no Barry. So the Resident Evil 3 Remake follows the shoes of its predecessor in terms of overall goals. We once again take control of Jill Valentine and her badassery. She has her amazing one-liners, and she takes care of business, all while Nemesis throws a wrench in things. To me, the Resident Evil Remake did a great job at re-envisioning the story and environments and making Jill an even more likable character. Even though the campaign was short, it packed a ton of action, and it showed more of the relationship growth between Carlos and Jill, from two strangers who don't even know each other to us against the world. Carlos also had his awesome share of one-liners, which from the original Mr. Rico Suave, but his commentary is definitely a spotlight when you take control of him. He has like a response to almost everything, and it's always funny and it's always great, and it kind of breaks up the mood. Each character has different abilities. Jill has her lockpick and grenade launcher. launcher, Carlos has his assault rifle and his punch attack, which was not expecting, and it was super cool. Like, just freaking punched the hell out of the zombies. It's a great change of pace switching the characters, especially because we switched places with Carlos twice, which was fun. Nikolai is still evil and a piece of crap who's only out for himself and a bank account, which I didn't really understand why you're worried about your bank account if the world's gonna end, dude. And as in previous Resident Evils, there are many files to be found containing little bits and pieces to the story. I found that the dead that had notes this time explaining, you know, like their journey, and be like, I was just doing it for my family, I know this is wrong, or like, I'm scared. If it hit you harder in the feels this time, it was like, yeah, I just killed you because you were a zombie coming at me. And then I see your death note there, and it's like, oh, now I feel bad about it. And I think it also hits a little bit harder just because we're in like these crazy times right now. The parallels are eerie. I mean, obviously we're not like in a zombie virus or anything, but it is like a scary time, and it kind of is the same vibe. Now let's talk about our enemies. In this game we have our zombies, obviously. The zombies you encounter in Resident Evil 3 are pretty much the same as the Resident Evil 2 remake in terms of how many bullets it takes to bring them down. It's not easy. But in this game, the biggest difference, in my opinion, is that they come in bigger groups. There's more of them. They're more of a mob than, you know, a couple. And obviously a big difference is that you can use red barrels. You can use electricity against your enemies in this. So that gave you a couple more ways to take care of them, which was exciting. We have super zombies. I don't know what they're called, but I call them super zombies. There's probably an official name for him. I don't know. But Nemesis creates these super zombies a la Resident Evil 4 tentacle head sucker things. They're harder to kill than a normal zombie, but they're not impossible to deal with. The tentacles suck, but they're not that bad. There are dogs in this, as in the original, but I feel like they're so much faster and harder to deal with in this version. There's not many of them, but I definitely remember all of my exchanges with them. We have Hunter Gammas. Hunter Gammas are like these terrible frog mutations that are instant deaths, so if they grab you, you're done. You have to use grenades, or you can shoot a leg, wait for the mouth to open technique. And we have ample ammo around that area, so they weren't much of a fuss for me. And then we have our Hunter Betas, which are like these terrifying monster things. I don't know, they look like something out of Doom. They're not necessarily one-shot kills, but if they get close to you, you're done. So it's all about like distance. I died from them once, and so that's what the load screen told me. Later in the game, we experience pale heads. Pale heads appear in nests, and they're extremely hard to kill because they have regenerative abilities. They suck. You have to put a lot into them. I started just using my shotgun on them. And they also reminded me of a Guillermo del Toro creature. They're terrifying. There's some well-placed ones throughout the game that give you a little bit of a jump scare. And then obviously we have our number one enemy, the Nemesis. He's everywhere. He stalks us the entirety of the game. Anytime you think he's dead, he's definitely not dead. Each encounter raised your heart rate and your blood pressure, but he's not as annoying as Mr. X. Nemesis battles are always exciting, but the two last encounters are completely amazing. And it was just really great seeing him brought to life in HD. Moving on to the look of the game. The graphics are obviously gorgeous, and the lighting effects can be so creepy at times. There were many cases where I had my flashlight out and I almost jump scared myself. The downtown Raccoon City areas were really fun. We saw a lot of them from the demo, so they weren't as like, but it truly feels alive. There are zombies crawling all over the place while you hear the city burning down and chaos in the distance, and it just gives you a constant unnerving effect. The televisions are flashing imagery of all this chaos. The power is out in certain parts of the city, so like only emergency lights are on, and then obviously you have moaning zombies and undead, and it just immerses you in the world, and it's a fantastic little survival horror feel. Each environment brings a new impressive feel and tone. I would say for me the highlight was the hospital. Nailed it. They freaking nailed it with the hospital. The dark corridors filled with gurneys and dead bodies, and you just never know what's lurking around the next corner. There's a specific scene that I think of when you catch these two hunters and they're just destroying employees and you're watching from a window. There's blood everywhere and it's brutal and animalistic and terrifying. And then knowing like I'm gonna have to go in that room was so dreadful that even like controlling someone who's like a macho guy like Carlos, I still didn't want to go into that. I was like a child. I was like, I do not want to go into this room. Nest 2 has some of like that same despair, the same kind of feeling as the original, but this time you see like a little bit more of a bigger picture. The beasts that are literally being created there, and like kind of like more about this dark entity that is the Umbrella Corporation. And I just really enjoyed all of these environments. Resident Evil 3 takes place before, during, and after the events of Resident Evil 2, and so there are overlapping environments as well, which are always super exciting to see. It gives you a little bit of the nostalgic feel because RE2 was so much fun to play that it's like, here's Kendo's gun shop again, or like, here's the parking garage, I can see it. Claire's gonna be going through there, and it just kind of reminds you, Claire and Leon are kind of going through the same thing right now, and kind of into that Resident Evil family. In terms of the look, as in glitches or bugs, I only experienced like a couple enemy falls where like a dog would land on a staircase and kind of like whoop, kind of move over a couple times, and then there was some zombies that had clipping in it still, but it wasn't something that was detrimental to the overall game. Something more of just like, I was like, hey man, you're clipping again. Like, you were clipping in the demo, I guess I didn't fix that. But nothing like too crazy. So now we're gonna go on to the field. Resident Evil 3, the controls are awesome as they were in Resident Evil 2. It's the same engine. Jill doesn't get stuck in corners and she moves with ease. The dodge mechanic has added a different challenge because in the previous iteration it was, defensive tools. This time you're armed only with the dodge. And although it can be like super hard to land, when you land the dodge, which I didn't land a ton, I'll be straight up, that I kind of just stopped trying because I just kept getting chomped on. But when you land a dodge, it's so satisfying. Turn over and you're just like bam, 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 5 to the noggin. So that's a really fun new control. I will say that the chase scenes with Nemesis, that he kind of turns from a cutscene into a chase scene, they were almost too fluid. It was very still cinematic. Like, you just push forward and you run, and then it's like, run here, turn to the right, jump over this gap. It's kind of like a cinematic and like quick time event more than you literally running from him. So it's almost too fluid. It just becomes too predictable in that way. As I said before, the Resident Evil engine is fantastic, and what stayed the same is the inventory, because don't fix what's not broken. The inventory management is simple and convenient, and in terms of how much ammo is available, I might have to blame that I played on standard, but I very rarely felt like I was screwed because I didn't have enough ammo. But in the same realm, I also would always backtrack for things and more items because I know it's a Resident Evil game, and so I always went back for things, so maybe it's just the way I play. And then the last part is gonna be things that in retrospect I feel like could have been improved. I finished the game like, yeah, this game is awesome, it's so much fun. My immediate thought was, oh, it's over already? It took me a couple days because I have a kid and I only play at night, but I still wanted more, and I was like, there's no other scenario to play after this. Like, you literally just gotta play the whole game over again. So I was kind of like bumming out about that. So I think when Resident Evil 3 Nemesis Remake was originally announced, we all were like, oh my god, this is gonna be Mr. X times 17. Like, this is gonna be crazy because Mr. X was just, he was like an internet sensation there. Like, all the memes, all like, Mr. X gonna give it to you. Like, everybody was like, yeah, Mr. X is the worst. Like, he's terrifying. And so I think that we all thought, oh man, Nemesis is gonna be like a way worse version. Part of me was like, oh no, am I gonna be able to play this game? Because Mr. X caused so much stress that I didn't even want to play anymore at one point. And Nemesis wasn't that. And I think the difference is Mr. X, he appeared and then he literally pursued you for an extended period of time. So it was like there were puzzles that needed to be completed, there were areas that hadn't been explored yet, all while you were just hearing his footsteps. And then, he would like kind of teleport, so you'd be like one part of the building and then you go into another part of the building, you open the door and he'd be right there. And he would just scare the living crap out of you. It was just like super unnerving. So we kind of thought that was what was gonna happen with Nemesis. At least I did. And while Nemesis did have that unnerving effect because you didn't know when he was gonna pop up, but it was like, where is that Nemesis cutscene gonna come from? And that's exactly it. It's a cutscene, not real time opening a door and boom, he's in your face. So it's not as scary, in my opinion. I think the only thing sort of like that was the downtown Raccoon City portion where you could have backtracked and opened up other areas. I think you could go in the toy shop, you could go in the convenience store, and maybe a few others. Once he was after me and pursuing me, those things went out the window. I didn't even think about them. I didn't even realize until it told me you could throw away your bolt cutter. And then I was like, wait, I missed all those areas. I didn't even go to those areas because like they weren't necessary. You didn't need to go to those areas. Whereas with Claire, it was like you had to go to the library because you had to do that puzzle with him in your freaking face. And so it was all just like, do it as fast as you can, hurry before he comes. And that wasn't necessarily the case with Nemesis. I almost feel like the spider section where you have to hold X and push down the generator where you can like see the critters coming towards you, that was more anxiety inducing to me than, oh, Nemesis is here, he's gonna throw me off of something, then I'm gonna cinematically run away from him and then maybe have a little mini boss battle with him, and then move to the next area. That's kind of more how it was, and it was more predictable in that matter. He was more of like just a great boss. Boss battles were all great, but he wasn't that ominous threat like Mr. X was. Obviously he's badass, obviously he's scary, terrifying, he has like crazy weaponry, but none of it was like, this is impossible to get through, how am I gonna get through this? Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I would have hated this game if he was more of like Mr. X and all of us would be pissed off and rage quit. Because I know some people did say Resident Evil 2 Remake was too difficult and that they wanted to give up. So maybe the developers heard that and were like, oh, let's take it back a notch and like stick with more quick time events and cinematic chases. I don't know. Another thing that I realized was kind of missing after the fact was the amount of puzzles. Like when you think about Resident Evil 2 Remake, or you even think about the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, there's a ton of puzzles in Resident Evil, like they're everywhere. This was more of like a go here, push the button, go here, push the button. It wasn't so much of like racking your brain. I can only remember like 2 puzzles really, and neither were difficult. Getting the subway going was for a moment confusing because I didn't realize like you tried it and then you saw the overall map. I just saw the little like scribble picture and I was like, what the hell does this mean? So then it was like, once I tried it and it didn't work and I saw the labels for the different stations, then it made sense and it was easy to do. And then lastly, and most obviously that I'm sure everyone's gonna have the same complaint as me, is it felt too short. It needed to be longer in my opinion. They had a lot to work with that they decided to cut out. So it's kind of, what was the reasoning behind that? It was a blast to play and the pacing felt good until I realized I was at Nest. I was like, I'm at Nest already? Like, wait a second. I was like, I want more. Maybe they just wanted to capitalize on like the success of RE2 and you know, they were in a hurry like, hey dude, RE2's killing it. Let's do the same thing. It's the same engine, so why not do the same thing with RE3 Nemesis and get it out? It's like almost 2 hours shorter for me. Like that's crazy. That's a lot of story and action that you can pack in 2 hours. Losing those 2 big environments from the original just feels like a bigger deal because the game was so short. Like had the game not been so short, I probably would have been like, yeah, whatever, like we didn't need those. It's 2 hours shorter, so maybe should have just added those 2 places and those would have taken up an hour each and that would have been fine. 8 hours is a good amount of game, I think, for 60 bucks. The replay value is there because like I finished the game and I'm at like 25% of trophies and I missed a lot of areas. Like I didn't go with the bolt cutters and I didn't go back with a lockpick at certain parts. I definitely didn't get all the Charlies. I got like maybe 3 Charlies. So there's obviously a ton of stuff I can still do. And I believe there's 5 difficulties too. So there's a lot to do. It also comes with Resident Evil Resistance, which maybe at some point Resident Evil Resistance was its own entity. And then they were like, oh crap, RE2 is doing so well. We should do RE3 right now. And then kind of like merge the 2 because you are getting kind of 2 games out of this, so maybe that's how they justify the $60 price tag. I haven't played Resistance yet, which is crazy, so I'm gonna give that a try, but I can't really speak on it until I play it. But all in all, it was a blast to play, and I will say that I did feel more satisfied with the Resident Evil 2 Remake. I just don't want to be that person that's like comparing it to RE2 or comparing RE2, but it's like they're the same engine. The originals were like a year apart from each other, so they're linked very closely, especially because you go to RPD again and there's overlapping times and overlapping environments, so it's hard not to compare the 2. I did thoroughly enjoy this game. There were moments that I was laughing, like the Carlos Call of Duty Zombies scene at the hospital where you're defending the door. It was such a change of pace and like kind of out of nowhere, and they like even disappeared. It was great. Nemesis was a great boss. The last 2 boss battles alone are insane. So there's a lot to be happy about, and it's just those little things that kind of damper it a tiny bit, but overall it was still a blast. There are some jump scares that get you where perfectly placed zombies or in corners or falling from the sky and ceilings and things like that. It was engaging, it could be difficult at times, and it was fun. I think overall I would give it a 9 out of 10 simply because I am comparing it to Resident Evil 2. I hate being that person, but it's because I had expectations going in. And I was like, oh, Nemesis kind of like wasn't that big of a deal. So that's kind of just like those certain things, and then the length definitely had a big effect on probably my rating, but I would still give it a 9 out of 10. It was a great game. Recommend to anyone. And if people are going in blind, they're gonna love it. And I would recommend people that have never played Resident Evil to pick this up because it's a fantastic game. It's fun, a lot of fun. Short, but a lot of fun. I look forward to whatever they're making next, whether that's Resident Evil 8 or they're making Resident Evil 4 remake. I don't know. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If I missed anything, leave it in the comments. And like I said, if you can, just subscribe. That'd be cool. I'll see you guys next time. Bye. It won't focus. is too close. Nemesis, you're too close.